today as we continue our series in Jesus, our rescue story. We're moving toward Easter, and of course we believe that because Jesus died for our sins and rose again, that He and He alone is the only one who can rescue us. And at times we're tempted to think there are other things that we can be rescued by or that factor into our salvation. Things like experts' approval, things like our works, things like even our own instincts. Last week we talked about traditions. And as we continue in this series, I want to make sure that I stress something. I like to say it this way. I want to make sure that you're not hearing what I'm not saying, okay? Especially with today, because last week when I talked about traditions, I would not want you to read the title and think, we're not saved by our traditions, to think, therefore I don't believe in traditions, or that traditions are all bad or wrong or not helpful. I don't believe that at all. I just don't think we don't put all of our faith in traditions, and that traditions, over time, can lose their purpose or their value or their meaning, and sometimes they need to change. The reason I say that is because it's the same thing today as we're going to talk about not through institutions. We're going to talk about how the institutions of Jesus' day, how they treated Him, and you may see the title and think not through institutions, that therefore I think institutions are bad and they're always wrong or they're always evil. And I don't think that, and I hope that'll come through the message. Today we're reading from Luke chapter 22, beginning at verse 47. We're also going to read from Mark chapter 9, beginning at verse 2. And again, as we're leading up to, we're 2 weeks away from Easter here, we'll see that the institutions of Jesus' day, which are similar to ours today, I think the two most powerful institutions of His time, government and religion, combined together to have Him killed. And I think the reason is pretty obvious. We'll talk some about that. But again, I think that a lot of institutions, like traditions, can start with good intentions, trying to bring something and establish something that will be helpful to everybody. And I'm sure that there's a lot of institutions, religious or government or whichever, that start off with this idea of like, hey, we got a good system here. If you follow us, if you give us your trust, if you do the things that we require, we know best, and this will be better for you and for everybody else. I've rarely met anyone who believes we should have no rules, no government, no systems or controls or structures at all. But we've all seen and experienced times when those structures or those systems or institutions take on too much control or turn in a way that they weren't meant to from the beginning. So it really is a challenge, but just so that we can have an operating definition today of how I see institutions, I took this from Wikipedia. It's in your bulletin here, but I'll read it to you as well. Here's a definition. I think this is good as any. An institution is a humanly devised structure of rules and norms that shape and constrain behavior. Okay? I read a lot of definitions. Most of them include some of those key words like structure, rules, norms, as well as restraints or constraining. I would say there's probably an easy one-word definition of institution. Power. Write that down in your outline. Control would be another one. That's very similar, but the idea of an institution is that someone has to be in charge or something. There has to be something that says, well, regardless of how you feel about it or we're all back and forth, somebody's got to make a decision, something has to be done, something has to be adhered to. So whoever's in charge or whatever's in charge, they have the power to dictate those things. Even in our country of, land by the people and for the people, we elect leaders who are supposed to represent us, but again, they have that power. And in our system of government, there's branches with certain, sections of power, checks and balances and all that. But again, there's still an institution and power that are supposed to be the ones in charge. And again, I think that once an institution is established, the number one rule for that institution becomes keeping power. Because without it, there's chaos and other things, no matter what political party you like or even just whatever country, whatever power, or institution is in control, if another group threatens that, then people feel like it's all going to change, it's all going to be terrible, it's all going to be worse. But it's all jockeying and positioning for power. Now, I'll say something a little different about that as we close. But this is what I think Jesus was contending with. Because Jesus clearly would not follow anyone's rules or norms. And He certainly couldn't be constrained. And the times when the religious leaders and the experts or even the Romans, when they came at Him and said, you're doing things wrong, you're not doing things our way, or you better stop this, whichever, He had no respect for their authority at all for good reasons, because He is the authority. But that's where, the rub began. And so the institutions of Jesus' day decided that, like people with power do, they're going to use their power to threaten him, and if he doesn't respond to those threats, then they will take over. They will, ruin his reputation. They'll threaten him with violence, and as we know with Jesus, they'll even put him to death, all for the sake of power. And that's what happens as we move toward this time when Jesus is going to be arrested and crucified. So this is what I think is at play. And we see this in Luke chapter 22, beginning at verse 47. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus said no more of this. He touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word for us today. Darkness reigns now because now the institutions have decided to exert their power. We see in this passage and some others the combination of the religious institution of Jesus' day, who apparently had their own police, not just the chief priests, but guards of the temple and soldiers, and they actually have weapons to come and enforce their rules, or at least try to. And then they also will work in partnership with the Roman authority at the time. We'll read passages about how they wanted to have, they being the religious leaders, wanted to have Jesus killed, but that was against their rules. So they went to the Romans, who did allow for executions, and they had to convince the government of the time that he was a threat to the state. So they were colluding together, but all for the same reason, to try to keep their power. But this is why this is so important for us to understand this going through it, because Jesus was not part of their institution. He was not going to succumb to their rules, their expectations, or anything like that. But again, we can still today not only want to have institutions and authority, but we can place so much faith, and I would say too much faith, in the institutions around us, that we have to meet within their guidelines, that we have to live according to their norms and expectations. And again, oftentimes it's all well-intended. The vast majority of it is good. But we also can see what happens when we give the institutions too much power and authority, not just over governance, but of our faith, to think that we have to pass their tests, like the experts and like others through this series. Jesus and Jesus alone is the only one who could rescue us, and that's what he came to do. But he did it outside of these other things that we often put so much credence or value into. And that's why we have to be careful when we do this. Now, here's the thing. When you have an amazing experience with Jesus, and that's where I think it starts with, not just I agree with this set of rules or values, but we meet the person of Jesus and we realize that we're saved by grace and not by works. We're going to talk about that next week. But when we have that experience, it's amazing. And sometimes we want to hold on to that. We want to keep that. We want to have a time where we can have that again on our own schedule. So we attempt to control it. We attempt to institutionalize it. And that's what I think we see happen. This is why I want us to read from Mark chapter 9, an example of this, where Jesus does something that only Jesus can do. It's supernatural, it's amazing, it's incredible, and it's beautiful. And the followers of Jesus want to institutionalize it. So let me read this to you from Mark chapter 9, begin at verse 2. But go ahead and write that down in your outline. We're often tempted to institutionalize our experiences. Okay? Leave that slide up a while. I know that's a big word. Institutionalize. Yeah. That we want to put it in cement. We want to mark it. We want to control it. We want to have it established so that we can have that experience again and have it whenever we want to. See if you agree with me. See if that's how you read it in Mark chapter 9, verse 2. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up on a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And they appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters." Your translation may have tabernacles or dwelling places. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And in verse 6 it says, he did not know what to say. They were so frightened. I always love that inclusion. But I got to say something, right? I mean, we got to respond here in some way. But he wasn't asked to respond. He wasn't asked to share his opinion or perspective. That's why in verse 7, then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. This is my son whom I love. Listen to him. He's not giving you any instructions. He just wants you to be here and have this experience. Verse 8, suddenly when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. So again, did you see it? They have this incredible transfiguration experience. They try to describe it in words, but words fail. But it was something supernatural. It was something initiated by God. But Jesus does all of it. They do nothing to contribute to it. But what do they want to do? Let us build shelters here. Let's put something down in the ground and pour concrete and post markers so that we can come back to this place again and remember this and experience that. That may not be inherently evil. In fact, I think it's pretty natural. It makes sense to me that you would want to do that because the experience is so amazing. I still think about where I came to know Christ, and I was at a Christian camp in North Georgia, and I remember a night when we were around in a special place at a campfire where I really felt that God was speaking directly to me and expressing His love for me and what He did for me. It all just kind of came together there. That's a sacred place for me. But there's no plaque there. Here, Wade Leonard gave his life to Christ, or something like that, or no sign or no marker. But I've gone back there several times just to kind of reconnect with that. So the desire to want to have special places, special markers, special symbols, that's actually a good thing. We'll talk some about that. But again, what does God say in response? This is my son whom I love. Listen to him. This isn't meant for you to establish something here like some kind of institution that everybody can come back to and everybody required to be a part of. It was special. It was unique. It was completely other than. And God was the one who initiated all of this. And that's why it's important that we not fall to the temptation to always want to make something where that took place like an institution. Let me tell you where I think is a modern day example of this. You may not agree with me, but this is kind of the way I see it based on passages like this. Let me show you a picture. Okay? Who knows where this place is? Once the picture comes up. We do have a picture, right, Mike? It's coming. There we go. All right. Who knows what that is? Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's right. Yeah, in Jerusalem. It is supposed to be the site where Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose again. And so, how many of you have been to Israel and seen it? Okay? And you know why you did? Because it's on the tour. Right? In fact, when I Googled this and looked it up, before it showed me images, it said, get tickets. Right? Yeah? You can buy tickets, you can wait there, you can go through the line, you can buy holy water, and you can buy, gopher wood things and T-shirts and other things like that. And again, I don't think it was established with the intent of being commercialized and institutionalized there, but that is what happens. In fact, going back into the history of this, you need to know this. Again, Jesus, crucified roughly 2,000 years ago. It became the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 325-ish A.D. by Constantine, the Roman emperor. Okay, after Christianity became the official religion of Rome. The Romans killed him, but 300 years later decided to worship him. And so, but before that, the Romans were trying to get rid of any kind of idea that this was a sacred place for Christ. So one of the previous emperors, Emperor Hadrian, from 117 to 138, had a temple dedicated to Jupiter and Venus built on that very site. But then later on, as times changed, that was raised, and then this new one was erected. And if you know the history now, there's actually lots of different churches and denominations that claim control of certain spots and certain sites and all these kind of things. It's changed back and forth over history. And God never asked any of us to do this. But why do we do it? Right? I mean, if for some reason, this is really a stretch, but if for some reason today, scholars found an ancient temple buried beneath Pumpkin Town, and said, this is a site where something amazing in God happened and that kind of thing, what do you think would happen? They built a tourist site to it. And people would flock there, and Again, they'd sell T-shirts and do all this other kind of thing. Again, I understand the purpose of it, but the challenge that we have is that once we try to manufacture and control and put roots in the ground of an experience, we're already going the wrong way. That's not what God calls us to do. Now again, I'm a big believer that we need to make sure that we have supernatural experiences. In fact, write that down. We need supernatural experiences. God even said so in John chapter 4, verse 48. He said, unless you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. So God knows that He's not just given us the Scripture and said, okay, figure it out for yourself, but rather He appears to us, He makes Himself known, He reveals Himself in many ways, and when we come to Christ, we have a personal experience with Him that supersedes anything else that we can really describe. And God knows that we need that. He provides those things for us. So it's important that we have those experiences again. But look back at verse 5 of chapter 9. Peter wants to establish a dwelling place, a tabernacle, a sacred site, so that they can come back and continue to have this feeling. But that's not how it works. That's not what he instructs us to do. That's not what's important for us. So instead, we need to make sure that we do other things. Now here's the thing. Don't misunderstand this part. It's still okay to have symbols. It's still okay to have things that remind us. In fact, write that down. We need symbols to remember these experiences, not to worship these symbols, not to make that place more important than anywhere else. That's not the point. But even, from the beginning, Joshua chapter 4, when they cross the Jordan River, God does something divine, supernatural, and amazing. And so God says, I want you to pile up some stones in the river so that you'll have a time to remember this. But it was meant to be something they could teach their children, not to come there and to believe that that's the only place where God comes, that it was sacred there, that it was special above other places. But to remember, hey, this is when God showed up. This is when God did something special. So it's great to have the symbols. But the problem is that, believe it or not, we can begin to worship the symbols. We can begin to worship the institutions. We can begin to worship the things that we make. Remember this in the Ten Commandments, Exodus chapter 20? What's the first commandment? You will have no other gods before me. Okay? God's number one. Number two, you shall not worship any graven image. Right? So the rule is, God is first, but then don't worship anything that you make, even if it's dedicated to God. So write that down. We need to be careful not to worship the things we make. And make no mistake, any institution is a man-made thing. Even if it's with good intentions, even if it has a lot of great history, we can begin to put too much faith in that institution. And here's one of the greatest problems that I see. Your last fill in the blank here. The danger of institutions is the illusion of control. Now, they do have a lot of power. They do have a lot of influence. But I say illusion because their power is not permanent. No institution, no government, no religious institution, no consolidation of people or groups or whatever have the ultimate authority. And sometimes they fall into that, or we want to give them that. And that's part of the danger that we have. We've got to be very careful about that idea. Me personally, I think that's at the root of a lot of what you see in our country today. Not just in the immediate current politics, but all the generations prior. And not just in our country, in other countries as well. We get so amped up about who's going to be in charge or who shouldn't be in charge and what they do or what they don't do. And again, it's important. There's a place for it. But what I'm arguing is that that's not where our ultimate faith and hope needs to be. God didn't create it that way. God didn't give us these institutions to do this kind of thing. Because again, just go all the way back to the beginning. Adam and Eve, what's their original sin? They want to be like God. They're given rules and a place and not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but they choose to do so because they want to be like God. They want to be in His place. And we're not meant to be that. When God created us, He gave us dominion over the earth, but under His dominion. Dominion doesn't mean complete control. You do whatever you want. You do this like Jesus did with His Father. You follow His example. You walk in His teachings. You do it like your dad does. That's the idea. But this is the problem. We decide we want more control. We want more power. We should be more in charge. We should dictate things and how they should go. And we were never meant to. Which is why until Christ returns, I don't care what country it is, I don't care what institution it is, I don't care what their intentions are, they'll never be able to establish a kind of rule and control that is the greatest good for everybody and everything works out. Because we're all mired in sin. We're all faulty. We're all incomplete. There are things that we try to do that we're not meant to do. Some of you know this, that during our whole configuration with the sanctuary rejuvenation, that when it came to picking out the colors and things like that, I stayed out of it. Because that's just not my thing. It's important. It needs to be done. We have some people who've done it, and I think it looks great. But people have asked me, well, what color is it? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, grayish, kind of thing. It actually reminds me of our house that we had built a few years ago. We met with the builder and the designer, and when it came time to pick out all the colors, we met with them, and we said, okay, how's this work? And they said, well, you come to our design center, and you sit down, and we give you all the options, and then usually after a couple hours, you got all your choices, and you're done. And I literally laughed out loud without meaning to. And the person looked at me and said, why are you laughing? I said, I'm sorry. I'm laughing because you're assuming my wife's going to make these decisions in 2 hours. That ain't happening. 2 weeks. So that we could go over every possible color chart, every possible, siding, every possible option to see those. We took samples of all of them, okay? And then we went to houses where they built them, and I stood out there and held it up, and she took pictures and did all this kind of stuff and everything. And again, it was fine. She loves that stuff, and she's good at that stuff. She matched it all up. It was all perfect. In our house, we have 2 colors. They said, you got 2 main colors. You choose 2. And so, you know what she chose? Gray and a darker gray. And to this day, I cannot tell you which is which. And she looks at me, she's like, isn't it obvious? This is the such and such. And they've got these fancy names like Stormy Monday and Elephant's Breath or something like that. I don't know what they are. But I'm looking at them side by side. I'm even like this. I can't tell the difference. It just looks gray to me. I love it. It's fine. But the point is, I'm not designed to pick out colors. Okay? When we got our horses, I married into it. I didn't know anything about it. She was like, do you see the quarter horse? Do you see the Palomino? Do you see the, Andalusian? I said, no, I see the black one and the brown one and the gray one. And I'm not even sure about that, really. And so, but the point is, you and I and all of us are made that way. Like, we can do certain things because God has gifted us to do those things, but we're not meant to do everything. And we are certainly not meant to be in control as if we make all the decisions. We are tempted to gather our best minds and our best gifts and our best spirits and even best intentions and say, we're going to set some rules, we're going to have some foundations, and we got to have some. I understand that. But again, we can't do it all, and we're not supposed to. We're not supposed to be in charge of everything. You and I can't make all those decisions individually, and we sure can't make all those decisions collectively, even with our best intentions. So I'm not saying don't have institutions. I'm not saying don't have systems of religion and government and those kind of things. What I'm saying is that we don't place all of our faith in those, even though they may think they can and should have all the power. But let me end with some good news, okay? I don't have any more points for you to fill in, but I do have some scriptures that I want to share with you. Because if you ever get discouraged, maybe you think the institutions of our country are too powerful. You don't like the decisions that they're making. Or maybe you think they do and we ought to give them even more power. Whatever you think about that. And like I said, not just our country, any group of rulers and institutions. You're worried they have too much power. You're worried they're going to do terrible things and awful things are going to happen. I'm not denying bad things could happen or whatever. But here's the good news that I want to share with you. Okay? They may have power and control, but again, it's an illusion. They don't have the ultimate power. They don't have the ultimate authority. They're not going to make decisions. So if you're discouraged, if you're afraid, I do understand. But it may be revealing that you're placing too much faith, too much hope, too much value, too much power in these institutions. And if you worry about that, then as we read the story of Jesus' arrest and crucifixion, you need to remember these verses that I want to share with you, because it may seem like the institutions have taken control. It may seem like the religious powers of Jesus' day and the government powers of today have combined. And everyone will look at that and go, well, look, if they're against you, you've got no hope. I mean, they've got too much power. They can throw you out of the synagogue. They can throw you in jail. They can even nail you to a cross. And so you better walk the line. You better conform to their rules. But Jesus, it may look like they're in control, but they're not. Jesus has submitted to this. Jesus is the one who has created all of these things and all these systems. And he's already lined up what's going to happen. And he's going to come back and he's going to rule and there's going to be perfect peace. And one day we're going to go to heaven where everything's perfect. And it's all going to be because of him and by him and for him and through him and orbiting around him. Everything's going to be through him. So even during his arrest and crucifixion, we see examples of this. And these are the verses I want to read to you so that you don't lose hope, so that you're not fooled into thinking that institutions then or even now have all the power, because it's an illusion. It's a lie. Okay? Let me give you a couple of examples. Again, in Luke chapter 22, verse 52 through 53, notice what Jesus says. When they come at him with clubs and swords and spears and things like that, he says, am I leading a rebellion where you come at me with swords and clubs? But this is your hour when darkness reigns. But again, it's an hour. It's not forever. And it's not certainly everything. To read this and really understand this, there's some other great verses in the Gospel of John. John chapter 18 and John chapter 19. I'm going to read them for you. They're in your outline. If you want to read them later, you can flip to it if you like. But here's some of those signs that we see that Jesus really is in control of all this. And these are verses that I love so much and I get excited about. John chapter 18, verse 3. Same idea that we just read in Luke. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief police and the Pharisees, the church police. Literally. They've got armed guards. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, who is it you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. I am he. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Now, you may have heard this before, but that Greek there for I am he is ego eimi. It's the emphatic, okay? If you were to say, who owns that? Does anybody, well, I got to get my English right here. I've got to get my grammar together. Okay. I'm going to go get some gas after this because my wife left the truck empty again. So, who's going to the gas station after worship? I am. Okay? That would be ego. Okay? I am. Okay? But then if you said, no, who's going to the gas station? I am. I am. If you ask me that probably about the 10th time, what do you think I'm going to say? I am. Are you getting this? I am. That's ego eimi. So when they come with their little sticks and swords and spears and torches, Jesus just goes out and says, I am. Remember when Moses asked the name of God? I am that I am. I am the great I am. I am the Alpha and Omega. Here they come with their little detachment of soldiers thinking that they have power. Jesus just steps up and speaks, I am. They all fall to the ground. They have no power at all. Only what he's given them, only what he's allowed. And we see that throughout the story. Similar, in John chapter 19, verse 6. Now Jesus is before Pilate, the governor, the one who's in charge of that area for the Roman Institute of Government. The power. Pilate has a lot of power, or at least he thinks so. Listen. Jesus is taken before Pilate. He's talking to this church police crowd and trying to get rid of Jesus. He doesn't see him as a threat. We're picking up at verse 6, John 19, verse 6. But Pilate answered, you take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must die. But we can't kill him, according to their law, like they're being lawful. Anyway, but because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, the governor, he was even more afraid. He went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. Listen to this in verse 10. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said, don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of the greater sin. Pilate literally doesn't know who he's talking to. And he's saying, don't you realize I have power over you? And Jesus says, no, you don't. The only reason you have power is because it's been granted to you for this hour, for a temporary time. But make no mistake, He doesn't have the ultimate power. In fact, when some of the other disciples, I'm going to read to you from Matthew 26, verse 52, 26, 52, that back when he's being arrested, and the disciples think, okay, they're coming at us with swords. It's time for us to pick up swords. It's time to fight. Jesus tells them something. They just don't see it. They don't understand. Jesus says, put your sword back in its place, Jesus said to Peter and the others. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. But again, he gives them this perspective because of this illusion that we often miss. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But then how would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? So again, Jesus could speak the word. Jesus could make the command, and the legions of heaven would come and defend him and destroy any worldly power before him. He's submitting to this because the prophecies were made. It's the way he set it up, and it's being fulfilled all according to Jesus' plan and all according to his power. They don't have any power. Not anything compared to God. And if you and I are afraid, if you and I get overwhelmed, sometimes it's just because we're looking at worldly power for a worldly moment at a certain time and thinking that they can do so much. No. Don't be fooled into that. Again, let's keep our institutions in check. Let's try to do the right things. Let's try to do some things with common sense. I totally get it. But that's not where all our faith is. That's not where all our hope is. Because Christ is going to come back. No matter who's in office, no matter what country has the most money or power, he's going to come back. And the scriptures promise us that there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and it's all going to be centered around Christ. And again, if you and I worry about all that, that's why it's in scripture for us. Revelation chapter 21, verse 3. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place, tabernacle. Remember, that's what Peter wanted to build. Not just a little cheap monuments on a mountain somewhere, but God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. You know, I've never heard a politician campaign and say something like, when I get into office, there'll be no more death. There'll be no more dying. There'll be no more disease. No one will suffer. Everything will be perfect. Nor should they. They don't have the power to do that. What if they wanted to? That's great and noble, but nobody has that power. No institution does. But God does. Don't be afraid. Don't become obsessed with it all. Don't get tricked into thinking if we don't do this or that or whatever, then everything else falls apart and all that. Vote, participate, share your thoughts. But our faith is not in the institutions, but in the power of Christ. Let's bow our heads and pray together. God, you know my heart on this. I ask forgiveness because even though I've just preached this, and it happens to me too, there are times when I get so worked up about something that happens in our world or through our institutions, and I think it's so wrong or I think it's so dangerous, and I feel not only powerless, but I feel like we've got to fight or we've got to change things, we've got to make things happen. And it just begins to show that oftentimes I'm putting my faith in the world, in things, even people with good intentions. But you've never asked me to do that. You never asked me to build a tabernacle. You never asked me to come to only one place or to one experience. Instead, God, before I even knew you, before I even knew what a sinner I was, you sent Jesus to die on the cross for my sin. And with me, you knew that 2,000 years later I would be born and I would come to a place where I was lost and I was confused and I was overwhelmed and I'd learned that I was truly a sinner and that I'd fallen short of your standard and grace. But then you made it clear to me. You said, wait, I know everything about you, all that you've done, all that you've said, even the things other people don't know about. But I still love you. You're my child. And not only do I want to save you, I've got plans for you. I've got a place for you. I want you to be part of my family. I've got things that I've prepared for you to do. And I'm going to empower you to do those things. And I learned that I was a child of God and I was a part of something. And again, God gave me that. I didn't earn it. And I want you to know from the Holy Spirit today, God is saying the same thing to you. He knows your failings, your faults, where you've fallen short, where you've lost faith. But He loves you. And He created you. And He's got a place for you in His family. He's got works for you to do that nobody else can do. And you're not meant to be in charge of it all. You're not meant to have all the power. None of us are. As we sang earlier, this is still our Father's world. He is still in charge of bringing all these things together. So don't be afraid. Just because you can't control it all, just because others don't make good decisions. Our institutions, they're not of God. One day, God, you will return and you will be the one to set all things right. Until then, let us work hard. Let us persevere. Let's champion justice. Let's meet the needs of others. Let's do the things that you've empowered us to do. But the things that we can't control, the things that don't make sense, let's confess once again, we live in a broken world where we chose to sin and turn away from God, and that's why there's disease and struggle and sickness and injustice and even death. But you love us so much that you sent your Son to die for all the sin of the world, so there could be a new heaven and a new earth. And that things could be like they were in the beginning, when you would dwell with us and we would dwell with you. You're going to set all those things right. So Lord, for my friends who are struggling, who are overwhelmed, who are afraid, maybe even obsessed with all these things, pray that you'd speak a word of comfort to say, I love your passion, but I want your trust to be in me. I want you to follow me in faith. I want you to know that I'm going to take care of everything, just as I promised, just as I have in the past and as I will in the future. You can trust me. So thank you, Lord, for giving us these assurances. Thank you that even during your crucifixion, you still showed that you were the one in charge. So God, help us to continue to walk in that and to share that and offer that to others. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.